Story number 1. He wanted to lockpick my door. I've had plenty of scary encounters in my life, but I'm going to go ahead and write about the one that happened just recently. When I say recent, I mean it happened just last week. First off, I'll start by saying that I'm a 17-year-old female, and I live with my dad and little brother. We live in a small community out here in the Pacific Northwest, where not too far away from us was an abandoned train track and railroad station. Honestly, there isn't really much out here, apart from the few homes located near me. You have miles of fields, and the occasional farm animals roaming around. More than anything, it's very rare to hear of a home intruder or a robbery, so you can imagine I never really paid attention to the reports on the TV. At around 5 p.m., my dad and little brother, who we will call James, end up leaving and heading to school. My brother's elementary school was about 30 minutes away, and they were having a get-together for the parents of the kids. So while they were away, I stayed at home to work on some homework. At least that's what I told my dad. Really, I just wanted an excuse to catch up on playing Kingdom Hearts since the third installment's coming soon. Before leaving though, my dad had left me some pasta and chicken so I could eat something when I got hungry. I should mention now that while I've stayed home alone plenty of times, after listening to scary stories, I can't help but feel paranoid sometimes. Anyways, so far the evening is going well. I'm playing video games and eating some pretzels and I'm having a good time. At around 7 p.m., I can begin to hear the sound of rain begin to hit my window. I always love that sound. It really makes for such an amazing video game playing experience. What I didn't like, however, were the noises I was hearing outside. It sounded like I was hearing footsteps. But here's the thing. It's almost like whoever was out there was doing what they could to walk as quietly as possible. Almost like they were trying not to go noticed. Immediately, my alarms chime in my head, but I explain it away as my dad or little brother. I'm there waiting for my dad to open the door, but nothing. Okay, now I'm starting to get suspicious. Yes, we do have a porch with a roof and a couch outside, but it's cold and raining. Surely my dad and little brother James would have entered the house by now, right? It's now I call my dad just to make sure he isn't messing around. Hey, Dad? Why are you and James outside? It's cold out there. What are you two doing?
I'm sorry, honey, but James and I are still at school. I got caught up talking with the other parents, and James is playing with his friends. We won't be home for at least another hour.
Okay, now I'm really starting to get suspicious. This is now the time where I slowly get up from my couch in the living room, and I make my way over to the front door. As carefully and as quietly as I could, I look through the curtain, and now I catch the glimpse of somebody walking around in the front yard. I can see what looks like an unmarked van with dim lighting, and they're parked a fair distance away. From the looks of it, the person was wearing all dark clothing, and they were very tall too, at least 6'3". I know one thing, wearing all dark clothing and walking around in the rain at night suspiciously in front of your house, it usually wasn't a good sign. Regardless, for some reason, I decided to forget about it. I told myself, "Come on, you're just overreacting. You've listened to way too many stories and you're making a big deal about something that probably has an explanation. Just relax." I should mention that we were going to have our internet fixed since it's been acting up. However, I don't remember my dad telling me the technician would be coming over. I decided to give it a chance nonetheless and called my dad yet again. Sadly, he didn't answer. Well, great. Now what? After about 5 minutes, I can hear the dark unmarked van start to drive off and leave. It's now I tell myself that it was most likely the technician, but he ended up leaving because he saw no lights on and noticed no one was home. I just wish that was the end of the story. However, let's get on to what happens next. About an hour later, so about 8:30 p.m., my dad messages me and tells me that both my little brother James and him were going to stop by Baskin-Robbins to pick up some ice cream. They wanted to know what flavor I wanted. Since I had already put the unexplained activity behind me, I forget to tell him about it, and instead I tell him I wanted strawberry ice cream. Another 20 minutes pass, and I figured now would be a great time to wash the dishes for my dinner. So I'm washing dishes, and once done, I decided to throw the trash outside. By now the rain had turned into a light drizzle, but the ground outside was muddy enough for me to put some boots on. While carrying the trash outside, I suddenly had this urge to look behind me. It's almost like something was telling me that I needed to see what was near me at all costs. I'm glad I do, because I now noticed a tall figure near the tree line, and they began to stumble and walk to my house. They were still a fair distance away, but thankfully they couldn't see me. At least, I was hoping so. I now run inside, and immediately I lock the door. Now I know what you're thinking. Why not just call officers? I wish I could have. See, in me playing video games, I had my iPhone playing music, but I only just noticed the charger wasn't charging my phone properly. Of course, when I looked over at the outlet, it wasn't even plugged in. Oops. Because of this, I wasn't paying attention to the percentage left, which was now just showing 2%. Sadly, we don't have a house phone anymore, so it's not like I could have used that either. As I go to pick up my phone, I can now begin to hear what sounds like the door handle being moved, almost like someone was trying to open it. A few seconds passed, and I listened in to confirm to what I was hearing. Indeed, what sounded like someone trying to pick the lock was now obvious. With what was left on my phone, I'm soon on the line with an operator.
Hello, operator. I need officers here, quick. Someone's trying to break into my house.
Okay, calm down. They're on their way. Can you tell me your address and where you are now?
I'm in the living room. Wait, I can hear someone. Are they? No, they're picking the lock.
In me saying this, I can hear what sounds like someone talking outside. I move the phone away from my ear, only to hear the deep voice of an older man saying, "Come on, I know you're in there. Why don't you let me in so we can play?" I immediately recognized the voice. See, I forgot to mention this earlier, but I work at a coffee shop where recently I've been dealing with a stalker, a man in his late 40s, early 50s, who I've caught following me into the parking lot at night once, and I've even had to deal with him in the shop on several occasions. How he knew where I lived? I have no idea. As all this is going on, I can see headlights light up the living room through the curtains, and I'm able to hear the undeniable chime of the car door alarm setting. It was my dad and my brother. This was when I can hear footsteps running off and eventually becoming distant and quiet. I hear my dad yelling at someone, but by the time I look out the window, they were now gone. My dad comes rushing inside the house, and he's calling my name, and I finally meet up with them. I'm now telling the operator that my dad is here, and she reassures me help will be there in about 5 minutes. Unfortunately, by the time they arrive, the man is long gone. They did look around the area, and what they found shocks me. Muddy footprints up and down the porch, tire tracks, and even the signs of scratches on the doorknob. Clearly, he was trying to get inside the house, and he must have known I was home alone. Update. It's been a week since it took place, but we haven't seen any signs of him returning. One night while getting off of work, however, my coworker John walked with me to my car. Both of us saw a suspicious-looking van with its lights off that was parked just a few parking spots away from us. As soon as we approached it, whoever was driving it drove off, and that was it. If anything else happens, I'll make sure to post a follow-up, but for now, that's all. Story number 2, Wintertime Intruder. This took place about 5 years ago when I was 15 years old. As some background context, I'm female. I'm more or less the same now than I was those many years ago. 5'3" and weigh about 110 pounds. I mentioned this because I would stand no chance against anyone who would try to do something. But to be fair, I'm now trained in martial arts and I even have pepper spray with me. Anyways, I'm currently in college, but this took place when I was a sophomore in high school. I still remember this because nothing like this has ever happened again. Anyways, it was about a week before Christmas, and I was home alone with my pet cat Max. Something I should mention about Max is that he is a sweetheart. Even so, you wouldn't want to get on his bad side. On this evening, it was cold and snowy like any other night in Pennsylvania, and I was at home watching some movies. In the meantime, my parents went shopping for last-minute Christmas presents. They told me they would be going to visit my grandma after shopping and wouldn't be home until around midnight. Fair enough, it was winter break and I finally had the house to myself to do whatever I wanted. On this night it meant having a movie marathon with my best friend Amy over Skype. This was actually something we did quite often, and it's sort of become a tradition during the winter months. Even now in college, we have our Skype talks and movie marathons. Anyways, back in that time, she had moved to Juneau, Alaska, so this was really our only way to hang out without having to travel all the way across the country. With Max next to me, we sat there for hours watching movies and laughing at all the cheap comedies we had available to watch. Eventually, we decided to mix things up and put on some scary movies. I'm not really a fan of spooky things, but she wanted us to watch something else that wasn't just fun and laughs. This was when it all started. Now, normally when you watch scary movies, you tend to get jumpy and filled with anxiety. That's how I was as we got into the first Paranormal Activity, which I know for many people is pretty tame. Not for me, however. Anyways, about halfway through, I tell Amy that I'm going to go and get some snacks, as well as give Max a little bit of food. We go to the kitchen and I start preparing the cat food, when suddenly I notice the light outside turn on. Normally it only turns on if it detects movement. Naturally, I thought perhaps there was a raccoon or a squirrel outside, so initially I ignored it. However, as I turned back to Max to feed him, I noticed all the hairs on his back were standing straight up. This was when he started to hiss and to meow as well. I'm talking about the kind of meowing cats do when they get angry. Well, it's now I'm getting a bit nervous, but I blame the movie on my nerves. Looking back, I probably should have looked behind me to see who might have been looking through the kitchen window. This would explain why Max reacted the way he did. Max now seems to relax as he chows down on some of the cat food I prepared for him. Soon thereafter, we make our way back to the room and we finish watching the movie. At around 11 p.m., Amy and I call it a night. Now I'm now just browsing the internet for funny cat videos to try and get my mind off of what I watched. It's now 11:30 p.m. and I get a call from my mom.
Hey there, sweetheart. Your dad and I are going to go ahead and spend the night here with your grandma. The snowstorm is really bad right now, and your dad doesn't want to go driving in the middle of the storm. If you need anything, I already let the neighbors know that you're there by yourself. Just make sure to call them if you need anything.
I guess I really couldn't blame them. After all, the snow really did start to pick up, and I sure wouldn't want them driving in the snow like that. Anywho, with them no longer having a plan to return tonight, I continue to watch videos on my phone. At around 12:30 a.m., I begin to hear what sounds like footsteps walking in the snow near my window. I can hear the obvious sounds of snow crunching underneath somebody's boots, and it's now I'm getting a bit scared. I live in a pretty small town, and for the most part, everyone leaves each other alone. Surely my neighbor wouldn't just be walking out at this time of night. They were an elderly couple in their late 70s, and I know for a fact they avoided walking around in the snow. Moving on, I carefully listened to the sounds of the snow as the footsteps seemed to head over to the bathroom window. That's when I thought of something. See, my bathroom window was sort of broken, and although it does close, it wouldn't lock properly. This was an issue I wish my dad would have fixed, but of course he never did until after it happened. Regardless, I grabbed one of my iron golf clubs that was underneath my bed, and I started to slowly make my way to the hallway to see if I could see anyone. I froze as soon as I could hear the sound of the bathroom window being opened. Slowly and quietly, I make my way back down the hallway, but instead, I hesitate when I hear the sound of someone coughing in the restroom. As quietly as I could, I make it back to my room. That's where I can see Max on the bed meowing. You can imagine I'm doing all I can to get him to stop hissing and meowing, but he won't stop. That's when I hear footsteps start to make their way over to my room. Great. I was trapped. Sure, I could have jumped out the window, but just like the restroom window, my window had a tendency of being difficult to open. Instantly, I thought of an idea. I decided to hide right next to the door so that when he opened the door, I would be behind it. Then once he walked into the room, I exit the room as he has his back turned to me. Then I book it to the front door. I think Max had a general idea of what was going on because he was a big help to our escape. I hide behind the door and slowly the door opens. With the nightlight on, I can see a man with a dark blue hoodie, dark jeans, and a beanie slowly stumble in. He sees my cat and starts calling over to him. Max wasn't having any of this. As I see him get closer to pet the cat, Max jumps right at him and he scratches his face, which causes him to stumble. Max now runs out the door and I take the opportunity to do the same. The thing is, as I make my way to the exit, he turns around and sees me. In pain, he jumps toward me, but Bam! I swing him, and I got him right in the face, which causes him to fall over and obviously pass out. Sorry, pal, you're in my house. Quickly, I move a couch in front of my bedroom door to trap him, and I call for help. Officers arrive within 10 minutes and find him struggling to open my bedroom window. He's taken away with a nasty bruise and scratch marks over his forehead, and officers praise me for my quick actions. Honestly, though, if it weren't for Max teaming up with me, things might have turned out differently. When all was said and done, my dad had the windows fixed and locks changed, and I never stayed home alone again. Story number 3. An Unsolved Mystery in the Woods. Hey there, my name is Adam, and I'm sort of new to this storytelling thing. My friend listens to your channel a lot, and he told me that I should write up and submit this story to you. So, here you go. I hope your audience will enjoy listening to my spooky experience. This happened to me back around 2005. I was 13 years old at the time, and it was just about 3 days before the new year. At the time, I was staying over at my uncle's house while my parents were on a business trip. They would later join myself and my uncle on New Year's Day, but in the meantime, I stayed with my uncle at his cabin near the mountains. This takes place in the Montana wilderness, in case you're wondering. I don't know about you, but staying in a cabin near the woods has this really nice feeling to it. There's just something about being away from the nearby city and being surrounded by trees and wilderness on all sides. Little did I know this would also be a curse. To quickly describe my uncle's cabin home, it was a single one-story home about 30 miles from the city. Out here in the woods, he was essentially on his own. Now, even though my uncle never married and never had any kids himself, he always spoiled me with the treats and toys like I was his son. Seriously, I always loved spending time with my uncle when I got the chance. This would be the only chance I ever got to go hiking, camping, and fishing, amongst other fun activities. Of course, since it had been snowing this December, we really didn't go out so much. So more than anything, my uncle and I just played Mario Party on the Nintendo I brought with me. Fun times, and I still have many fond memories of all the mini-games we played. That's enough backstory though. One afternoon, my uncle told me he was going to go into town to get some shopping done, as well as meeting up with a friend. I myself had gotten sick, so I opted to stay at the house and just lay in bed and watch TV. Meanwhile, my uncle left me some warm soup and medicine I could take to feel better. I guess that's what happens when you go playing in the snow so late at night. Oh well. Before continuing though, I don't want to forget about mentioning Rocky. Rocky was my uncle's 2-year-old Siberian Husky. He was very well trained and he would defend you if you were in trouble. This night though would prove that. At the time my uncle left the house, it was 7 p.m. and it was very dark and cold outside. I guess that was the only complaint I did have about being out here. Not to mention, he's all the way out here in the middle of nowhere. In case of an emergency, there was no neighbor to help you out. Surely calling for help would mean at least a 20-minute wait if they were fast. Anyways, fast forward about an hour or so and I'm starting to feel better. I figured I can get my mind off of being alone by playing some Zelda. That's what I end up doing for a while. Eventually, I do get bored of this and I figured now would be a good time to let Rocky out to use the restroom. I go ahead and grab a nice warm coat and some gloves and we head outside. Luckily, the snow wasn't too deep, so walking around in normal shoes was easy. So we go into the backyard and Rocky starts walking around. That's when, for whatever reason, he decides to take off into the woods. I waited for him for a while, but seeing as he wasn't responding back to me, I figured I had no choice than to go look for him. I go inside the house to grab a flashlight, then start making my way into the cold abandoned woods. From the looks of it, Rocky had taken the small narrow trail that's just beyond the tree line. It leads into an open field about a 5-minute walk away, and I figured that's where Rocky was heading. There is a nice little river that Rocky, my uncle, and I would always go to go fishing. So I made the short walk down the trail, and eventually I make my way onto the field. Just as I expected, Rocky was right next to the river and just staring off into the distance. I did find it strange, but I call Rocky over anyways, which gets his attention. As Rocky started to walk over to me, however, I heard the sound of snow crunching to my right behind some trees. Now remember, all I had for light was a flashlight, and even that wasn't helpful considering how dark it was here. Honestly, that should have been my sign to just end up going. but I stick around letting my curiosity get the best of me. Also, for some reason, Rocky didn't seem to react, so I figured it could have been a small animal. Though thinking about it now, the footsteps sounded too heavy for them to be a small mammal such as a rabbit or even a squirrel. Regardless, I was now starting to get a bit nervous as Rocky finally started to growl. This was my sign that I probably shouldn't stick around and find out what's out here. As Rocky and I started to make our way down the path, I can hear what sounded like someone whispering. Then, they were humming a sound. It sounded like someone was humming one of those old creepy nursery rhymes. I know it sounds cliche, but that's sort of how it sounded. It was at this point that the last bit of curiosity had left me, and panic started to set in. The once brave Rocky was now on the defensive as he was pushing me to continue forward. All the meanwhile, I can hear him growling as we're walking back home. Just like that, though, the noises and whispering stop, and Rocky seems to settle down yet again. This was temporary, though, because soon enough, we hear what sounds like someone running around us. Rocky is now once again in protective mode and begins to bark loudly, warning whatever or whoever was surrounding us. As my hands are shaking and I'm frozen shining the light around me, my light shines onto a person standing about 50 feet away from us. Honestly, what I was facing almost made me drop my flashlight. I still remember how he looked like. He was a man in about his early 30s, with long greasy blonde hair and a ponytail, glasses, and oversized clothing. Why anyone would be out here just walking around this late at night in 5-degree weather, I'm not exactly sure. One thing was for sure though, Max stood in between both of us growling and barking. This man, however, never even reacted. He just stood there staring at us, not once saying anything. He did, however, have this look of malice. The best way I can describe it is a wolf that had been looking for prey all day, and finally they found what they were looking for. Even with all of this going on, I figured perhaps there had to be an explanation, and maybe I was overthinking all of this. After all, maybe they were just lost. Yeah, I know, it's dumb looking back now, but I was young and naive.
Hello there, sir. Is something wrong? This is private property. I'm going to need you to leave or I'm calling officers.
Really, I had no way of contacting them since the only phone was back at the house. He doesn't respond and continues to look over to me. Rocky is now urging me to push forward, so that's what we end up doing. About 20 seconds later or so, I'm finally thinking the strange man had left. Instead, I can hear him call out to me in the distance. This was then followed by laughter. Now, I'm not talking about the sort of laughter you hear when somebody tells a joke. I'm talking about the kind of laughter you would hear from a madman. It's finally now my brain tells me to run, and so we're both booking it down the trail. I still remember all the adrenaline going through me as I can hear him yell out and say,
"Come here, I have something for you."
Just then, I feel a cold breeze pass next to my head. As I look ahead of me, a large rock had just landed a few feet away. This guy had thrown a sharp rock at me, and had it connected, things would have turned out worse, although I'm pretty sure Rocky would have taken care of him. We continue running until eventually we make it off the trail and onto the property. We then make our way underneath my uncle's fence and are soon on the patio heading inside. Luckily for us, my uncle had just arrived, and you can imagine the look on his face. He was surprised and worried about where I was, but after struggling to tell him what had happened, he eventually gets the majority of it. My uncle tells me to stay inside, and he heads out into the backyard. Suddenly, I hear the warning pop of his .38 go off into the woods, followed by him returning back inside. Eventually, we waited until officers arrived and they searched the nearby woods. What they found was a mystery. They find a tent that consisted of some blankets, a large pair of sharp scissors, the kind you use when gardening, a cable for tying things up, tape, a newspaper. Sadly, the man was never found and he never did return. I don't know who he was or what he had planned or why he was even out there, but considering what was found at his campsite, I'm pretty sure it wasn't anything good. It's been over 13 years and the mystery still remains unsolved. Story number 5. Always lock your windows. To begin my story, I will start by talking about where I lived. This was back around 2013 when I was still living back at home with my parents. I'm female, by the way, and I was 17 years old when it took place. We lived on 3 acres of foothills out in Utah. Getting to our property required you to drive down a 2-mile dirt road. It was closed by a chain link fence. As you can imagine though, out here there were no homes even close to us. At night you had the moonlight and stars to light your surroundings, and all you could really see were miles of empty fields and creeks. It was so empty, in fact, you wouldn't want to be walking around at night. We get coyotes from time to time and have even spotted mountain lions. Anywho, one evening it was just myself and my little sister Abby, who was 9 years old at the time. I was in charge of looking after the house. Both my mom and dad were away on vacation, and I was put in charge of looking after things. Not that I minded it, really. We never get visitors, so it would be a nice 3-day break from having our parents here. Mind you, this was during the summertime, and since our air conditioning wasn't working, we kept the windows open to let the cool breeze in. That night, we pretty much just stayed up playing video games together until we decided to go to sleep. No, both my sister and I were in the same room as she didn't want to sleep by herself. Our house is 2 stories where she sleeps upstairs with my parents. I guess I couldn't blame her in not wanting the whole 2nd story to herself. Well, fast forward to 1 in the morning. I'm now awakened by my sister.
Sis, wake up. Come on, wake up.
Abby, what is it? What time is it?
Come on, what's wrong now? Sis, come on. I'm not playing around. I heard voices outside the house and things are being moved around. Are you sure you weren't just dreaming? Go back to sleep already, Abby.
Needless to say, I ignore her, and she seems satisfied with my response. However, 20 minutes later, it's the same thing. This time around, I tell her to grab hold of one of my baseball bats, and I would go check things out with the other one. As quietly as I could, I begin to walk through the dark, empty hallways of the home, and indeed, I can hear what sounds like somebody whispering outside and knocking on the windows. What happens next, however, sends chills down my spine. As I make my way into the kitchen, I see what looks to be like an older woman with long dark hair and old dirty clothing, and she's eating away at the food that was in her refrigerator. She also had a backpack which appeared to have food from her cabinets she had stolen. At first I was shocked, but then I got angry as this lady just made her way into the house uninvited. With the deepest and loudest voice I could muster, I quickly turned the light on and shouted,
"What are you doing in our house? Get out now!"
I was swinging for the fences with my baseball bat, and as soon as she turned around and saw me, she booked it. She jumped out the kitchen window, which was completely opened. Immediately, I lock all the other windows in the house and call officers. They arrive about 15 minutes later and find nothing but food wrappers and empty cans of food. However, they did say they would monitor the surrounding area for a while. With our parents on vacation, we call our uncle, who comes to pick us up an hour later. As we're leaving the house, we can see what looks like a figure making their way back to our home. Well, it's still dark out, but my uncle decides to turn the car off and watch this person. We now watch as someone makes their way into the home yet again. Luckily for us, calling for help resulted in officers arriving in less than 5 minutes. This time around, they found the same woman, along with another man who appeared to be in his late 40s. They were in the process of taking valuables from our house as they were caught. Needless to say, they were taken away along with an old Honda Civic that was parked nearby. Presumably, it belonged to one of them. And that was it. Story number 6. Mysterious Man at School Camp. When I look back at this encounter, I feel kinda silly for not telling any of the staff or teachers I was with. Honestly, things could have turned out so much worse. Sure, it wasn't the most scary thing in the world to happen, but it's definitely the most memorable for myself. To start the experience, let's go ahead and give you some background context. See, I was in high school, and every year, my school will hold a summer camp for students to attend. It's located out in the wilderness next to a farm. It takes place for about 3 weeks, and it's here we do all sorts of fun activities. Camping, fishing, learning, hiking, you name it. The whole point of the camp was to learn life lessons, but for me, I was more interested in being with friends. Summertime at home was fairly boring anyway, so this was a perfect escape from my normal life in the city. Another important aspect of the camp was so that we could learn to be on our own without relying on our parents or even teachers. Anywho, with that bit of background information told, this was on the last week of the camp. We will call it the solo time. Teachers and staff would lead us to a different part of the surrounding wilderness and property from where the main campsite was. As a side note, some strange things definitely took place there, like seeing occasional wild animals, but this one is the most unnerving. There were about 15 of us in total, plus a few staff, and they put us into teams, if you want to call them that. We would be in separate tents along the outskirts of the farm, just far enough apart that we could see each other through the surrounding trees. In between us was plenty of dirt with plain field surrounding a fence line. It was nothing too large, but regardless, we were in an area where there were no way cars could get to us, if that makes sense. Anyways, we're out here in our groups camping and talking until eventually I have the urge to use the restroom. Sadly, with no bathroom nearby, I wandered into the woods to do my business. To get to the specific part of the woods I planned on going to, I would take a small hill which for some reason no one else had seemed to have gone to. Probably because even though it was small, it was very steep. Don't think anyone really had the energy to walk up. When you got up there, you could actually see the other neighbors' tents through the tree lines on each side. All in all, it would be a nice view. Now it's around 11:30 p.m. and I'm making my way up. Something else to note was I saw no other lights on in any of the tents, so clearly everyone else was fast asleep. Eventually I take care of my restroom break and I decided I wanted to explore a little bit. I had my flashlight and I figured I would see what else was around. After all, it's not every day you get to explore the woods on your own. I go down the other side of this hill and I stumble across a path. I say path, but it was more like a trail of dirt next to some trees and a larger hill with an even better view. As I'm making my way down the trail and further up the next hill, I almost fall over a tree branch, and it's now my nerves are starting to tease me a bit. Every little sound was beginning to make me paranoid. Blaming it on my over-imaginative mind, I ignore these feelings. Besides, it would be worth it to catch the view up ahead. I did have one of those terrible digital watches, and it told me it was past midnight. This was about the time I heard something else. What sounded like quiet footsteps could be heard behind me. I ignore it thinking it's an animal, and I keep walking. Then the sound of a branch being stepped on not even 20 feet behind me. My heart sank, and I turned off my flashlight. I didn't dare take a look behind me because there was definitely someone or something walking there. Whoever it was kept walking past where I was, which by this point I had hidden behind a tree. As they passed me, I was expecting to see a fellow classmate or even a teacher. However, this person was taller than anyone in our group. He was at least 6'5". The tallest person in our group was just under 6 foot. On top of this, our entire group are girls and none of the teachers were male. My heart is pounding as I'm thinking perhaps this man might have found me. As he is about to leave, I suddenly get the urge to sneeze. As best as I could, I try to stop it, but I ended up sneezing. This causes the man to stop in his tracks and turn around. I now book it with my flashlight off and run back the way I'd come from. While running, I ended up tripping and scraping my arm against some of the trees and branches. After hearing heavy breathing following me, all goes quiet and I make it back to my tent. For whatever reason, I don't end up saying anything and I'm on the lookout listening for any signs of noise. I guess more than anything, I was worried I would get in trouble for venturing out on my own. Later on the next morning, other people in the camp came forward saying they heard footsteps walking around their tents at night. They told us that they would hear leaves moving around and branches breaking. It kept the other girls awake, but they blamed the staff. The staff, however, tells us it was none of them, and the latest they had been out was at 8 p.m. I, of course, wanted to know if there were any men at the farm nearby who may have possibly been responsible. To my surprise, I find out the farm is run by an older woman, and all the workers go home every night. She was the only one there the night as her husband had been out in town the whole time. I really don't like thinking about it because one of my friends said she was walking out at night earlier and she saw the silhouette of someone hiding in the trees, but she convinced herself she was seeing things. What's scary is that a month later in the news, there was a story of a group of girls camping about an hour away. They were robbed by someone wearing all dark clothing. Now, whether or not both persons are related, I'm not too sure, but still makes me wonder what might have happened. Story number 7, CCTV Christmas Time Intruder. This story was submitted by one of my many subscribers who would like to remain anonymous. We will call him Alex. Also, some of the details have been changed to hide personal information. Here we go. Hey there, Creepy Fox. This happened during Christmas time. I thought you would enjoy reading this. I'm 18 years old, and this happened on Christmas Eve. It was myself and my baby sister, as our mother had been working. This was awesome because my sister and I would order some pizza and play games all night. For this story, we'll call my sister Jennifer. So a few hours after playing some board games, we started to get bored and we went upstairs to go do our own things. My sister goes to her bedroom and I go to mine. Once we're in our own personal spaces, I now grab one of my games and turn my Xbox on. Fast forward a couple of hours later and it's almost 8 p.m. Honestly, am I the only one who will play video games for hours and not even realize how much time has gone by? Yeah, I figured as much. So I go ahead and take a break to go use the restroom. While in there, I hear what sounded like the front living door closing. Thinking it was my mom, I exit the restroom and I shout out,
Mom, is that you? Are you home already?
Honestly, I wasn't expecting her to get home until around 10 p.m., so this did make me somewhat suspicious. Was it possible my sister was the one who closed the door?
Jennifer? Hey, Jennifer, what are you doing down there?
No answer at the door. However, she opens up her bedroom door.
What is it, Alex? What are you yelling for? What's up?
I stopped my yelling and looked right at her in surprise. So let me get this straight. If it wasn't my mom and it wasn't my little sister Jennifer, then who was it? Well, when I tell her what happened, we both can hear the undeniable sound of slow footsteps making their way up the stairs. Quickly, Jennifer and I make our way into our room and immediately I lock the door. I now turn the TV off and I grab the .45 my grandpa gave me a few years ago. From here, we make our way behind the bed. Now, I have to admit, I've never been so scared in my life, and up until this point, I'd only heard stories of home invasions. To actually be part of one was definitely something else. After about a minute, we both hear the door to Jennifer's room open slowly, but just like that, silence. We waited for a couple of minutes, which honestly felt like hours. All of a sudden, the footsteps walked away. After that, we both can hear the front door of the house close. This was when I decided to be the brave brother I was, and I go and check the hallways and bedrooms, even the first story too. That was when I remembered the security cameras my mom recently had installed. I guess my sister and I were so caught up in what was taking place, I had forgotten about them. The thing is, the computer that shows the footage is all the way in my mom's room. Regardless, I make my way over and I turn the computer on. Quickly, I go ahead and rewind the footage until I arrive to the time everything took place. What I was now looking at was not my mom. It was someone wearing all dark clothing with a creepy-looking ski mask. They seemed to have unlocked the front door with a key. I'm guessing it was the spare key my mother had left in the plants next to the door. They then walk in, close the door, and when I'm yelling for my mom, they look up and make their way to the staircase. The intruder then goes over to my sister's room, then walks out shortly after. The next part, I will never forget. Just like I mentioned earlier, they walk over to my room, and then they stop right in front of it. That was when they turn around and happen to have noticed the camera. They stand there for a couple of minutes just staring. That's when they walk away and leave. Of course, we called for help right away, and they end up looking over the CCTV footage. Apparently, it turns out he had gotten into somebody else's house a couple of nights ago. Because of this happening, our mother ended up getting back home from work a couple of hours earlier. The man has yet to be found. Story number 8, Lost in the Woods. First off, let me just start off by saying that I've been a fan of yours since you first started. Thank you for the countless hours of stories you've told in the past 2 years. It really means a lot to us. Anyways, all of this took place about 3 years ago. The good thing is I wrote this down in a journal so that one day I could tell it to my kids. I figured in the meantime you can share it with everybody on your channel. Here goes. It was toward the end of April, and finally, after countless hours at work at the office, I finally had some time off for myself. Normally, most people would take the time to catch up on sleep or play video games, but I was different. I decided I would use my time to go into the wilderness to get some early season hiking done. I actually ended up choosing a hike I've done plenty of times in the past. It's about 13 miles round trip, and it takes you to this lonesome hot spring that's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Now, to be fair, it's not the most difficult walk in the world. Sure, the path is worn down a bit, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. Even so, the trail does eventually get steeper and it starts to go up into a mountainous area. Also, in order to get to the hot springs, you have to go over a large creek. But as I mentioned, having already done this walk less than a month ago, I was pretty confident this time around would be even easier. This was going to be a quick trip to take some photos and take in some of the sights. Then after, I'd go home before sunset. The morning was Wednesday. I get some supplies in my backpack, and soon I'm on the trail at around 7 a.m. Excited and delighted to be out here on my own, I ended up walking faster than I normally did. I think I was just really looking forward to getting to the hot springs that I pretty much ignored all the other nice sights in between. The path I take eventually goes off into a wooded area that's right alongside a ravine, that's then followed by a creek down below. This would be the area I would cross later on in my trip. Note that even though it was late spring, there was still some snow left over from a snowfall we had a couple of days ago. I could still see some of it shining on the trees and leaves around me. After another couple of miles, the trail begins to head down into the creek where I would eventually have to get to in order to cross. I got there and carefully I start crossing some of the stones in the river. One misstep, however, and splash! I'm now in the icy cold water. The next part seriously felt like forever, but it was only for about 20 or 30 seconds. I end up getting my foot stuck in between some rocks, and I'm trying all I could to break free. The current was definitely not helping as I struggled to stay above the water. Finally, I'm able to break free and make my way out of the water. My poor foot, however, it was hurting really badly, and it started to get all red. That's when I now take a look at my watch. Oh no, it's now 4 p.m., and I don't know, but for some reason I thought it was way earlier. Well, with one small step, I instantly could tell it was going to be a challenge to get out of the woods. Add the fact I was cold and wet from the water, and it looked like more than anything I'd be spending a night out here. Thankfully, though, I did have some supplies for starting a campfire and some snacks I had packed. Also, I was about half a mile from the hot springs, so I figured I could go rest there. Slowly, I make my way over. Now, let me tell you, it seems that after I fell into the water, it got dark super quick, because next thing I knew, I couldn't see. It also didn't help that I had no flashlight. You see, I never intended on staying out after dark, so this was really bad. Left with no other options, I now take a seat and start making a small campfire. I go ahead and take some nearby rock, then warm them up and put them in the dirt. Then I go ahead and put a blanket over it to make a natural heating pad. It was actually quite effective. Eventually, I end up sleeping, and we fast forward some time later. I don't recall how long it was, but suddenly I wake up freezing. To add on top of this, it's now raining. I was so cold, I couldn't sleep, and I knew deep down I was starting to get sick. Thankfully, though, there is a large boulder I can go under to get away from the rain, which ended up helping me out. I make another campfire, and eventually I fall asleep again. The next morning, I was up right before sunset, and it's only now I realize how close I was to the hot springs. Without hesitation, I get into the warm water, letting it soothe my pain. After about an hour, I knew that I had to get out, and so I decided now was the time to move. Somehow I managed to cross the river with the stones a second time, and this time without falling in. With 2 large sticks I found next to the river, I make my way until I finally reach my car. When all was said and done, I did end up having a broken foot, but thankfully after a month or so I got better. It's funny because after it took place, all my coworkers treated me like I was Superman. Being able to walk all the way out of the woods with a bad foot and all, and of course the fact that a mountain lion or bear could have come after me, though to be honest, I've never seen any out there. Regardless, I learned my lesson. Let's examine what I did wrong. 1. For starters, never go out into the woods alone, especially if you're not too experienced. 2. Make sure to tell a family member or friend you're going out hiking and when you will get back. 3. Make sure you have plenty of supplies for any and all worst-case scenarios. 4. Bring an extra change of clothes, preferably the kind to match the current season. 5. Of course, the most important, always expect the unexpected. Nature is beautiful, but if you aren't careful, she'll get you. With that, I end my story. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed and learned something. Story number 9, Alaska Nighttime Winter Encounter. Hey there, thought I would go ahead and submit my story. This was a couple of years ago in December of 2016. I was 17 years old and I was a senior in high school. This story takes place in Anchorage, by the way. Now, normally after school, I would either drive directly home or sometimes I would go get some coffee with some friends. It's here we would either do homework or even talk. It's a fun tradition we still do together even in college. Anyways, I describe that because that was usually my routine. This, however, happened over the weekend, so I was at home. On this evening, it was my mom and dad's wedding anniversary, and they would be going to dinner. I myself had stayed home with our 2-year-old dachshund named Zoe. Strange name for a dog, but I always loved the name Zoe, so I gave her that. About an hour after they left, I decided I would take Zoe for a walk. It was nice at first, a nice, quiet walk down some of the nearby neighborhoods with the light snow falling. I'm a couple of streets away from my home, and I was texting my best friend. That was when I could hear my dog barking. I look up from my phone, and this older man who appeared to be in his 40s was standing right in front of me.
Hi there, sir. Was there something you were looking for?
I'll admit, it was something about him that made me pretty nervous. He just stood there, and when I tried to pass him, he would move and stand in my way.
I just wanted to say I really like watching you walk your dog.
He said this with a really eerie smile on his face. Zoe now starts barking at him, which causes him to step back a bit. I start to back away, but he now starts to step closer. Immediately, Zoe and I take off running back to my house that was just on the other street. Looking back, it probably wasn't a smart idea to run directly to my house, but I really had no other choice. Just as I expected, I look back and there he is running after me. I make it to my porch and I look back to see him standing next to the nearby street lamp. He's got this grin on his face that pretty much says, "I'll see you real soon." I now watch from the window as he walks off into the dark, only for me to never see him again. Word of advice, don't walk alone at night in Anchorage. Story number 10, Encounter in the Woods. I'm almost 20 years old, but this event happened over a year ago. I still remember it. It was early April, and I was with my 13-year-old cousin. In this story, we will go ahead and call her Ashley. Both Ashley and I were always the very outdoorsy types. Most of our friends were usually about hanging out at the mall or staying at home. We were the complete opposite. Anytime we got the opportunity to step out and go into the woods, we would. I should mention this now, but my cousin was living with my Nana and Papa. They live out in the countryside and have a large backyard with a wooded area right behind it. Even though they do live far away from any major city, they do have some neighbors, with the closest being about 5 minutes away. I only mention this because it will play an important part of the story later on. Okay, so like I mentioned, it was around April and Ashley and I wanted to go check out the nearby woods. We both put on our waterproof boots and spring clothing and tell our Nana we would be on our way. Nana says,
"Okay, you two have fun. Just make sure not to go too far into the woods. It's going to rain a little bit later this afternoon, and I wouldn't want you two getting sick. Oh yeah, and make sure to bring your flashlights and pepper spray too."
Now, it's important to mention that when we pack our things to go into the woods, we always pack as if we're going camping. I mean, sometimes we wouldn't even stay out there that long. I guess it was just us being prepared for anything. You just never know. Fast forward a couple of hours later, Ashley and I are on a dirt trail. As we're walking, we both ended up noticing something we had never seen before. Up ahead of us, we can see what looks to be like an old abandoned-looking cabin, if you want to call it that. It wasn't your typical cabin. It was just this small-looking house that could have easily been made in about 30 minutes with wood. Ashley and I have been in these woods countless times, but this was the first time we'd explored this section of the woods. Curiosity gets the better of us, and we go and check the cabin out. I mean, as teenagers always looking for an excuse to explore something new, this was perfect. Not even 10 feet later, we start to hear the sounds of branches breaking. This causes both of us to stop and look around to identify the noise. That was when both of us instantly get down and hide underneath a large tree branch. We can now see what looks to be like a tall figure, wearing what looked to be like a trench coat. My cousin was nervous, but I tried my best to calm her down and act brave. The man now walks over to the cabin-like structure. This is now when my cousin and I start to make our way back to the trail. Believe it or not, this would be our first mistake. Since this was early April, a lot of the old branches and leaves laid on the dirt path. This meant that just a couple of steps in would cause noise to echo into the nearby woods. This also explained how we were able to hear the man walking out here in the first place. Well, Ashley being the clumsy one of the two of us, she ends up stepping on a large branch which ends up making a loud noise. Right in that moment, we can hear shuffling of footsteps from the nearby abandoned cabin, and this man runs out. He's now making his way towards us, Ashley screaming, and both of us start running towards the trail which leads us back to Nana and Papa's house. As we start to run, the sudden realization of how fast he was started to echo in my head. Obviously, even if we did outrun him and make it to the house, there was no way Nana or Papa could help us. They were the sweetest couple you would ever meet, but there was no way they could fend for us. Yes, I remember the pepper spray, but since it was windy out, I wasn't sure it would work. In one quick moment of thinking, we both decided to jump off the path and head into the woods. As we do this, it now starts to rain, and we can even hear the sound of thunder. It was a bummer, but we take advantage of this because along with how dark the woods were, the cloud cover made it that much more difficult to see us. Quickly, Ashley and I hide behind some large shrubbery and we hide. We can both hear the sounds of footsteps as they now come to a complete standstill. Honestly, it was hard to hear them because of how much it had started to rain. That was when Ashley and I both realized how close we were to the outskirts of the woods. Do you remember how I told you my Nana and Papa's neighbors were about 5 minutes away? Well, through the opening of the trees, we can just see the neighbor's house with the front porch light on. Without hesitation, we book it. We can see the neighbor's son, who is about 23 years old, and that's when we get his attention. You can just imagine how cold and soaked we were from the rain, and we were crying. Thankfully, the man from the woods never noticed us, so we made it out safely. Once inside, we called police, and they arrived shortly after to search the woods. Unfortunately, they didn't find him. What we do, however, is wait for the rain to stop and then lead them towards where we found the cabin. It was now gone. What looked like tracks in the dirt of someone moving stuff had been left in the ground. Regardless, the officers call it in. Recalling the entire thing, Ashley and I both thought about something. Every time we would go into the woods, we never ran into someone with such a malicious attitude. It's funny because the animals out here were way kinder. Ashley did tell me that there was one time she had gone into the woods, only to hear what sounded like someone calling out to her. Of course, she would just explain it away as her imagination. After further investigation, no one was found. Still, this didn't stop us from exploring, but it did make us more aware of our surroundings. Before we get to the last story, I just want to say thank you once again for making it this far in the video. Remember, if you'd like to see more, including previews and exclusive content, then make sure to be following me over on my Instagram, @TheCreepyFoxOfficial. Thanks. On to the last story. Story number 11, Strange Singing in the Woods. So this took place about 5 years ago. I was only 13 years old, and my family and I were on a weekend hike in the nearby mountains. We spent most of the afternoon checking out waterfalls and natural springs. It's now about 7 p.m. and it's starting to get dark. It's now we decided we would start to make our way back home. Before leaving the woods completely, however, we stopped to have some snacks which we had brought with us. Once done, I told my parents I wanted to head into the woods to use the restroom. My parents tell me they would wait for me at the edge of the woods, which was about a 5-minute walk away. As I walk into the nearby trees and take care of my business, I begin to hear something. My curiosity was telling me to go check it out, and so I started to follow the noise. After a couple of minutes, the noise stops, and I realize I need to head back. After all, I'm alone and I've gotten lost in the woods once. I really didn't want that happening again. I start to follow the path in front of me, and that's when I can hear someone singing. It was hard to understand what was being said, so for whatever reason, I yet again start to follow the noise. This song was coming from this old abandoned home that was out here in the deep woods. I make my way inside, and then bam, then it repeated. I could then hear a lady singing something. I look ahead of me and I can see this older woman. I'd say she was in her late 40s with half her hair gone. I couldn't see all the details because of how dark it was, so I take my flashlight out and shine it at her. She then turned her head and started screaming at the top of her lungs. She then grabs my arm, but I quickly break free, running away as fast as possible. I can now hear the sounds of her chasing me. I never did look back, but her screaming got further and further away. This was when I slowed down to take a deep breath. Up ahead of me, I could see a park ranger's vehicle along with my parents. I run up to them crying, and I'm telling the park ranger about what I experienced. We leave, but I never did get any more updates regarding her. Not that I really cared. Not after that experience. I'm now in college, but anytime I think about it, it gives me the chills.